This year's Geneva Motor Show seemed to be proof that the petrolhead is not a dying breed, as most manufacturers seem to be going for broke. You'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. 2016 is certainly shaping up to be an exciting one for the car scene, with all kinds of things out there to make you drool. There are also a lot of things out there that weren't so good, so let's start with that. Firstly, Audi introduced their new Q2, because we really needed another one of these stupid urban SUV things. You know, I'm really starting to think that these German manufacturers are using a mood board inspired by alphabet soup, or maybe they just have one of those rooms full of monkeys on typewriters or something. Anyway, continuing with the SUV trend, Maserati unveiled their entry to the SUV market with the Levante, most likely intended to compete with the likes of the Porsche Cayenne. The Italian SUV will have a starting price of £54,000, which, in its defense, is fairly reasonable when compared with its rivals. But as some people on the internet have pointed out, why not just get this Mazda instead? Because they look kinda similar. And finally, we glance at the infamous upmarket tuners of Geneva, with aftermarket tuning brand Nimrod coming in with the height of awfulness at Geneva with their take on the Aventador. Yeah, believe it or not, there is a Lamborghini in there somewhere, I think. Maybe. Now that we got that out of the way, let's move on to the more positive things. As I said before, there was all kinds of exciting new stuff to see at Geneva. So let's start with arguably the most hyped event of the show, the Bugatti Chiron. This sci-fi looking thing is set to be the replacement for the legendary Veyron. With a top speed of 261 miles an hour, it is the world's fastest road car and will have a price tag of £1.9 million. And for that you get 1,500 horsepower on tap. Only 500 will be produced, with a third of those already having been sold, but I'm sure we can expect a few spin-off versions such as the Grand Sport and Super Sport as we had with the Veyron. Continuing with the hypercar theme, Lamborghini unveiled yet another limited edition run of cars, this time to celebrate the 100th birthday of the company's founder. Called the Centenario, it looks typically bonkers, and as far as I can tell is basically an Aventador underneath, with a couple more zeros added onto the price tag. So if you're into that sort of thing. Moving away from all this number crunching madness, Aston Martin decided to do something a little bit different for this year's show, as they brought along what can only be described as a piece of automotive pornography. The car in question is the DB11, which is set to be the replacement for the much-loved DB9. Now, as usual, I'm going to list a few facts and figures, although in this case, if you're anything like me, you won't give a damn because, well, look how pretty it is. Like many manufacturers these days, Aston Martin has turned to forced induction on this one, with a 5.2-litre twin-turbo V12 producing 600 horsepower. And if, like many others, you're afraid that those turbos are going to spoil that V12 roar, well, don't be, because I've heard it and it sounds exactly how an Aston should. Now, coming towards the end of the programme, there were a million other cars out there that deserve to be spoken about, so I will go through a quick list of honourable mentions. Firstly, as I mentioned in the previous episode, we've got the Huayra BC, an 800 horsepower, more hardcore version of Pagani's flagship car. Then we've got the 911R, basically a GT3 RS without the ridiculous rear wing and with a manual gearbox. So basically driving perfection in a neat little package, but only to be produced in a very limited amount of 991 units. Next up is the Ford GT, Ford's re-entry into the supercar world with a rather striking take on the original Ford GT40, and of course replacement for the early 2000s Ford GT. McLaren showed an interest in a more practical everyday car, if you can call it that, with a new variant of the 570S, Named the 570 GT, it's basically the same car, but with a quieter tyre compound, steel brakes rather than carbon ceramics, a quieter exhaust, larger luggage space, and a rather nice hinged glass door on the rear. Ferrari introduced the replacement for the FF, the GT-C4 Lusso. Its V12 now makes 690 horsepower, putting it closer to the F12, and has some subtle but rather lovely aesthetic tweaks. And finally, Swedish manufacturer Koenigsegg brought along their first production version of the Regera, a 1500 hybrid hypercar that can fold out like some kind of transformer thing. Despite its £1.2 million price tag, Koenigsegg are apparently receiving one order a week for these, and the waiting list now goes into 2019. Of course, there are many other cars I would love to cover from Geneva, but doing it so would take quite some time. So that was my summary of the 2016 Geneva Motor Show. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.